to thanking Jen and the university and the department and Kern for this incredible series and allowing me the opportunity to stand here and share with you, some of the things that I've been working on and my thinking around this whole ideal of, memory, but more important to me is returning millions of victims back to some level of dignity, grace, and humanity. So this is going to be sort of a mixed, multimodal sort of presentation, and hopefully you'll bear with me. And at the end, I hope it will be insightful and productive and fruitful and worthy of your time, more importantly. But before I get started, as I stand here, I have to recognize that I am not standing here on my own. There's many people that came before me. So in my tradition and my idea, I have to acknowledge my, what I call Igun. Igun is essentially ancestors. And these are my Igun. So I give eternal praises to my Igun, hopefully that I can, as I live out my life, continue all that they've given me to make it possible for me to live in a human way and pass it on to at least I'm a brand new grandfather, first time. And share with my grandson. So with that said and done, given those thanks and praises, I think things are now decent and in order and we can proceed. So the click is not working, so I'm gonna have to click from here. So I am find essence for that. So ready? Let's sort of um, so what I want to do is these are the discussion questions, rhetorical. We can get the technology always fails us when we want it to work. But these are sort of questions that we're going to try to deal with tonight, the topics, if you will. As Jen mentioned, I'm with an organization called Diving with a Purpose. I'm going to talk a bit about that. But more importantly, this whole question of what is the prevailing narrative out there about particularly what we call the, quote, slave trade, and I'll deal with that in a moment. And this whole narrative around enslavement, racism, white supremacy, we have to have those conversations in a very civil, thoughtful way if we're going to move forward, again, as one humanity. So I'm going to talk about how I see decolonizing that narrative, particularly around what I call the transatlantic, more specifically the transoceanic era of African enslavement, because this happened way beyond the Atlantic. But more importantly, memory and remembrance. We have to get beyond the silence and the shame when we're talking about this topic, because it has impacted every one of your lives that's sitting in this room, whether you're conscious of it or not. So we have to have that discussion. And this whole artifact we call, quote, slave ship, that played a central role in this incredible phenomenon that we haven't seen anything like it in human history in terms of scale. I don't like to compare suffering, but this was massive. And so the slave ship played a critical role, and we'll talk about what that role was. More importantly, the ritual around memory, ritualization of memory, excuse me, and memorialization. I've had some incredible experiences diving on these shipwrecks. I stand here very humbly and not with a lot of vanity and say I've dove on 5 wrecks that was involved in the trade. Most of I don't know if anybody else has done that actually. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And the South José and the Clotilda, we'll talk about those in depth, but also try to put in historical context, maybe 2 or 3 other shipwrecks that's out there that's not getting a lot of notoriety. And I'll wrap it up with talking about this notion of, and Jen probably can relate a little bit, how we engage this materiality of the trade, these artifacts, right? We always, we are measuring and probing and cutting and sewing and touching and so forth. But there's a whole nother dimension we haven't given much attention to that I think, as a matter of fact, excuse me, I'm pretty sure that it can inform us as well. And that's somewhat of the best word I can come up with is a quote spiritual dimension. But that brings a lot of baggage with it. But hopefully we can unpack that and get an understanding of what I'm talking about. This whole spiritual dimension of archaeology and how artifacts can inform you, particularly artifacts that have gone through traumatic sort of experiences and where there was a loss of human life. And lastly, I'll talk about why I'm here, why I brought a crew with me here. And we're going to be over in Africa Town over the weekend, hopefully doing some incredible work, trying to touch some young minds. As I said, I'm a scuba diver. I like this picture. It's a Nat Geo photo. I have over 1,500 dives, and roughly a third of those dives have been on these wrecks. And again, I've gained a lot of insight from diving on these wrecks. But more so, what got me started was the organization called Diving with a Purpose. Diving with a Purpose has been around for almost over 17 years or so. It's an incredible organization that got founded by an incredible gentleman named Ken Stewart, lives in Nashville, and another archaeologist, excuse me, maritime archaeologist named Brenda Lazendahl. They just kind of serendipitously intersected down in Key Largo, Florida. She was the archaeologist for National Park Service, Biscayne National Park, near Key Largo in South Florida. They, again, just by accident sort of connected, and she said, Ken, I got all these wrecks out here in the bay, hundreds of them, and I got a federal mandate to document and survey all these wrecks. But it was an unfunded mandate, right? That's how government works. So you get the work done, but they ain't gonna pay you. But anyway, Ken said, well, I have some divers. As a matter of fact, Ken was a representative of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers at the time, the Northeast Rep, I think it was. And so she said, well, I can bring the divers if you give us, the boat and equipment, we can help you out. And then a miracle happened. Out of that grew Diving with a Purpose, and we've trained now well over 300 certified scuba divers to do this work. And we got a youth component as well that I'll talk a bit about. But our primary focus is to focus on shipwrecks that was involved in the transatlantic era of African enslavement, what I call the so-called the Atlantic slave trade. And I'll tell you why I do that. So, but we teach them how to do these basic techniques in underwater archaeology. And those are just basic things. We can talk more about that later, but every June we take up to 25 or 30 divers and just immerse them, no pun intended, into the work of documenting and surveying shipwrecks. This is our youth program. We have YDWP, Youth Diving with a Purpose. Maritime archaeology is one of our components, but our other operational components is coral reef restoration and protection. And so we do coral reef surveys and documentation. You can see these young folks is holding up So I was going to say staghorn. Uh, uh, elkhorn, elkhorn, elkhorn coral that they're going to outplant on reefs that's in the stress and hopefully start a recovery process. Very small scale, needs to be scaled up much, much larger, but it is an effort. And they're learning a lot from this process. Going in the wrong direction. It's working now, it seems. So we do some other work as well, not just on ships. And this is one of our better projects. We collaborated with NOAA, Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary up in Michigan, with the archaeologists up there, Wayne Lasardi. There was the Tuskegee Airmen, whom you all have some familiarity with. They used to train up there in the Great Lakes region, particularly around Lake Huron, because there was an Army air base at the time during World War II. There was no Air Force at the time. So they flew out of that base and did practice over the water. And so this gentleman here, Frank Moody, Howard University graduate, and went to Tuskegee to fight in the war, to learn to fly and fight in the war. But he was flying about 300 feet off the water of Lake Huron in a P-39 Cobra. The engine went out and he went in the water at about 300 miles an hour. The P-39 Cobra is a very unique sort of airplane. This is the panel of the P-39 Cobra. In the front, the engine is not in the front, the engine is behind him. And so when he went in the water, the engine came through the cockpit. And you can just imagine the results. But what we found was, again, under the direction of Wayne Lasardi, is this the panel here. Seeing if the pointer works, but that's the panel there. And back in 2015, we found that panel under the water. That's the panel there. I'm sorry, I'm looking for it's pointing here if I can grab it. So this is the panel here that was located. And we say, well, is this the panel that came off the plane? Well, the plane had an identification number, radio call signal number. That's the radio call signal number. And it matched up with the records that plane that Lieutenant Moody was flying. This is me working on the tail section. And I'm going to point out Melody Garrett, who's in the audience. She's a diver. Melody, wave, please. Thank you. Melody was on this team as well. Yeah, I'll show you the team here in a moment that did this work. And the work is ongoing. They are extracting some of the artifacts out of the lake, and we're going to be putting them on display, after we curate them and conserve them on display in the Tuskegee Airmen's Museum in Detroit. This is the team here. That's Melody and a couple of my other colleagues. This is Wayne Lasardi, the principal investigator, Eric Denson, and she's with the sanctuary. So that work was done. And we memorialized these individuals with this incredible monument we put up there in August of 21. It's a solid black granite obelisk, Tekenu they call them. And so it has the story of the airmen on each side. There are 4 additional planes in the lake as well. We know where another one is, but the other 3, Wayne is working to try to locate those 3 as well. We know there's 5 that went down from the historical record. So this is it on the promenade up there. Very, very beautiful. This Lake St. Clair that flows out of Lake Huron down into Lake Erie, I believe it is, past Detroit. So it's if you're up that way, it's worth a visit for sure. This is in Port Huron, Michigan. We collaborate with our partners, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, through the Shipwrecks project. It does a lot of this work. DWP is a global partner with the Shipwrecks project. This look might be a familiar face. We also collaborate with the Society of Black Archaeologists, Dr. Justin Donovan and Dr. Ayana Fluellen. We taught them both how to dive, and now they started out with a trial and digging. Jan, no pun intended, no criticism here, but they like the water a little bit better. So So, but they're working on both terrestrial and underwater, and then doing some incredible underwater work. Justin just got off the boat with Bob Ballard on the Nautilus research vessel. So again, doing some incredible work. You might have said this series that was in the March 2022 issue of the National Geographic. This young lady, Tara, she came to us being DWP, and she was wondering who was these black divers doing this work. She visited the museum and saw a picture of these young black women, and that changed her life. It's literally changed her life. This is the first time we see an African American woman on the cover of the National Geographic magazine. It's incredible and great. That seriously has changed her life in more ways than one. And now she's sequestered and writing a book about this journey she's been on. She has lifted up DWT so high, it's just absolutely incredible. So this was the cover that they went with, but this was the one they was considering. Probably the second cover. Yeah, look at it real closely. Her mask is fogged up there, so dag Tara. I think that's a conspiracy. No, but they gave me the centerfold. Well, it wasn't quite the centerfold, but I did get a fold in the magazine. So decolonizing what I call the false narrative that we all sort of been victimized, and we all are victims when I say that. So I'm going to make it very, very clear, and I'm very passionate about this, right? And what is it? That our ancestors were never slaves. I say it again. Our ancestors were never slaves. They was forced into enslavement by a global system of racism, white supremacy. Enslavement was a condition, not an identity. That's critical to understand. It's been elevated as an identity. Every time I say your ancestors were slaves and look at you, that diminishes you. That diminishes your humanity, your dignity, your everything. These were human beings. They wasn't standing on the coast waving their hands. Hey, come pick me up, Gomez. I'm right here. I'm going to work for you all my life, and my descendants are going to work for you all my life, and you don't have to pay us. No, that wasn't the case. These people were in very complex societies that was completely disrupted when this whole system of enslavement began. So we were never slaves. We were enslaved. I think that's a fundamental point to make. So I try very consciously not to use that word, quote, slave or slavery, right? So instead of saying the transatlantic slave trade, I say the transatlantic era of African enslavement. I was in Lisbon last week doing some incredible work with some incredible visionaries from all over the world, from practically every continent. And we signed a pact that I won't talk much about that, but the reference here is Portugal. Portugal has a very serious identity crisis. Very serious, that they don't want to even acknowledge their role in enslavement. Out of all the European countries that was involved in the trade, Portugal embarked and disembarked more Africans than any one of the others, particularly in the latter part of the 18th century. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. So again, as I said earlier, I don't like to compare tragedies and so forth, but if I say Holocaust, that comes to mind, you know what comes to mind instantly, right? But if I say Ma'afa, have you heard that term before? That's the term we use to describe what happened to the continent of Africa. It's a key Swahili word that means disaster. It was an incredible disaster that happened. So it's a great disaster with the mafia that happened to us. So with that said, I'm gonna just throw out a few hypothetical questions, and you can reflect on those as we go forward. Can you imagine, just imagine what it'd be like to live without memory of who you are, where you came from, your history, your culture. No identity that's locked into history and memory. Just imagine that. Who would you be? The memory connects a person to history and ancestors. If you are disconnected from those ancestors and memory, you're going to wander around lost, misguided, not knowing who came before you. Who am I? Those critical philosophical questions. So memory and being connected to your ancestors, those that came before, give you guidance going forward. And I just throw this out just as a perspective, if you will, on African philosophy, cosmology, if you will. When they think about the past, they don't think about the past as being behind them. Stay with me here. I might cause a bit of cognitive dissonance, but they don't think about the past, but past is in front of you. You can see it. You have the history. You have the memory, right? And it provides the guidance. What you cannot see is what? What's going to happen tomorrow? You have no clue. What's going to happen in the next hour? We have can't see that. But we can use our memory and remembrance from the past that's in front of you as guidance. So the most fundamental question, though, for all of us, particularly in this country and so-called West and Western European country, how did it become possible for a nation founded on democratic principles of freedom and justice for all to allow over 250 years of chattel slavery and bondage to more than 5 million human beings? That's in the U.S. alone. All in the shaping of so-called Western civilization as a global system of brutal bondage and oppression existed for more than 400 years and not be deeply embedded in our collective memory and curriculum. And so now the reverse is happening, right? Folks want to extract it out of our memory, extract it out of our curriculum. Don't want our children to know about these incredible stories. It is my position and contention that if we do know, if we do remember, it makes us all a better human being. It's just a question of how we react to it. It's not about shaming, it's about knowing and remembering. Because without memory, there's no future. Without memory, there's no future. That's why there's a lot of interest in controlling the narrative of what that memory looks like. And so I'm standing here to say our narrative is fundamentally different than the prevailing narrative that's out there now. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. So collective memory is important. I mean, we act in a lot of different ways. Psychologically, you see it manifest in identity crisis, the trauma that comes with it, because we don't have a good, clear sense of what memory is. So this young man, this is part of a very powerful display called the Afro-Atlantic, and he don't want to remember. And what he forgets is pouring white paint over his head, whitewashing his brain to forget. But we have to engage our young people not to engage on these types of acts, but to remember. And when we remember, it's not fabricating stories. Remembering is telling the truth. The historical record is very, very clear. So anytime we speak, we have to speak truth, okay? We have to speak truth that's justified. That's what this memory is about, this mission is about. So restoring memory and collective identity is very essential in order to repair the harm that's been caused to so many human beings and reclaim our dignity and grace and our humanity. If we can't restore the memory, we can't have that dignity restored. Boy, just got to chill. Because in Portugal last week, very tragically, we went to a parking lot in a putt-putt golf course. Under that parking lot, the putt-putt golf course was a trash dump that was part of the city of Faro in the south of Portugal when it was developing in the 16th, 17th century. But under that parking lot now exists 300 Africans that was disposed of unceremoniously into that trash pit, a garbage dump. So we had to go there and do the right thing to restore that dignity and grace. And so we did a little ritual. And interesting enough, the Portuguese police thought we was coming to vandalize the place. So the police showed up. It was bizarre. But at the end, when they saw what we was doing, they was embracing us, restoring dignity and humanity to those people. So as we go about this process, it's important that we recognize that knowledge comes in a lot of ways. There's written knowledge, there's oral knowledge, oral traditions, and most of these, quote, indigenous, that word. But anyway, most of these indigenous societies have oral traditions. And what you will find in these oral traditions, that their memory retention is incredible. In African philosophical perspective, they have griots that retain the memory and history of these cultures. Nowadays, if I ask someone where, for example, I don't know, what does philosophy mean? Tell me the story of your great grandfather. There was young folks, particularly, maybe say, well, let me use Chat GPT or let me Google that, see if I can find it. But these folks was recalling and reciting memory from their own head, verbatim, exact word for word, and pass that tradition down word for word over hundreds of centuries, sometimes millennia. And folks there are African societies, civilizations that more than 1,000 years old. Some are now, for example, in northern Tanzania, Mozambique rather, is one of them. But anyway, that's another story. The point is that memory and these oral traditions has embedded knowledge that has been ignored simply because we say, well, they didn't have a script. Like that is primacy, right? In terms of knowledge production. As society has many, many ways to produce knowledge, and oral traditions has a lot embedded in them. So when we talk about, enslavement, we have to confront just the abject, incredible horror and torture that goes along with that. I know it gets chilling. I'm a very emotional person, and I don't mind crying when I'm moved. And I do that. You might have saw me at press conferences here with Clotilda, weeping like a baby. But it touches you. It touches your soul. It touches your spirit. And when I was interacting with these artifacts, I can go there and do the analysis and so forth. But once you touch them, you're touching the essence of those people that was impacted by these vessels. So the horror, the torture is all there. But what we have to remember that these were human beings and they resisted. They resisted on the continent, they resisted on the coastline, they resisted in the small boats that took them to the big boats, they resisted on the big boats, they resisted when they got into the Americas. There was resistance to retain and maintain that dignity and humanity. To maintain that dignity and humanity. So that's just a few examples of those resistance. Sinbei Pai, you might have known as Joseph Sinke. These in the woods there, strategizing how they can reclaim their dignity. Nat Turner, Zumbia Palmares down in Brazil, resisted and established a community that lasted over 200 years before the Portuguese eventually overran this, what was called a Quilombo. In other areas, they call them maroon societies. So when you experience this type of trauma, these types of experiences, it creates trauma. And that trauma, whether it happened 1,000 years ago, is passed on generationally. So that's transgenerational trauma that we are still dealing with here. That's still deep in my bone because my ancestors had these horrible experiences. And it manifests in different ways in terms of behavior. We start victimizing ourselves, we start lashing out at society, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that transgenerational epigenetic trauma is embedded in the mitochondrial DNA. It don't go into the cell, but it's on the cell and place a marker there. And that marker is passed on. And so when you engage, say, an artifact, or you engage something that will jog your memory, it reawakens that trauma. And that trauma has to be dealt with. That's what we're talking about when we say we have to heal. That massive historic trauma that was a consequence of the transatlantic era of African enslavement. But we're all connected to the water. I love the water as a diver, and the water is essential to all of us. As you all probably know, we are 70% water, right? And roughly 70% of water covers the earth. So there's tremendous interconnectivity here, right? So we are connected to the water, and people have been thinking about water and what it means. Toni Morrison, if you heard of her, she's a noted writer, author. She says, all water has perfect memory. It is forgetting, trying to get back. It is forever trying to get back to where it was. Sort of like the hydrologic cycle, if you can imagine that. But it has perfect memory. The ocean has memory. The ocean has memory embedded in the waters. And we can tap into it. This piece here is from a powerful artist named Khalida Rawls in California. You can see She creates an image of water, and these two women dressed in white, what are they doing? Are they struggling to survive? Excuse me, is some sort of joy that they're celebrating with? You can see that their arms are interlocked here. So what it reminds me of is that transgenerational epigenetic trauma that's embedded in the water. You can see their arms. What do their arms remind you of? A DNA helix. A DNA helix. So the water is essential for us to reclaim this memory. We have to be connected to the water. Other writers wrote about it. Derek Walcott, St. Lucian writer, he said the sea is water. He was talking about Africans that was thrown overboard or purposely jumped overboard. That bones are soldered by coral to bone. They're mosaics, mammal by the benediction of the shark's shadow. Lucille Clifton, who was the Port Laureate of Maryland at one time, she said the Atlantic is a sea of bones. The Atlantic is a sea of bones, my bones, and elegant Africans, my elegant Africans, connecting Rita and New York, a bridge of ivory, seabeds, they call it. And there was other writers that wrote about it as well. Robert Hayden was another writer that wrote about this connectivity and Black rebellious connected to water. But in the Atlantic Ocean itself, there are some 2 million African souls laying on the bottom of the Atlantic, unacknowledged, unknown. 2 million. That's like taking the cities of Richmond, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and maybe Baltimore, wiping out all those people and no one says anything, don't remember, forget about them. There's 2 million on the bottom of the Atlantic. UNESCO tried to address this issue because as we move into the AI and digital age, there's need for these strategic minerals. And where they're getting these strategic minerals is off the bottom of the ocean. And those 2 million souls, more than 2 million actually, are being violated. So there's been attempts to write some sort of protocol for this work. And hopefully it happens. So but we have to, as they do this work, and if material is discovered, which could be possible, human material that is, how do we memorialize them? How do, again, we reestablish their dignity and their humanity? The National Society of Black Scuba Divers, we did this back in the early 90s. There was a wreck called the Henrietta Marie off the Florida Key West, Florida. It's about a 6-hour boat ride out. But we put a marker down there for those victims that was on the Henrietta Marie. They wasn't on the ship when it went down. They had already disembarked in Jamaica. And the Henrietta Marie was trying to make it back to England with the spoils that they had collected, payments and money and other goods they had traded these people for in Jamaica. But they got caught in a storm and sank. And the National Society of Black Engineers. My background is engineering. But the National Society of National Association of Black Scuba Divers put this marker down there to honor those that was on the Henrietta Marie. So I said earlier, the slave ship is a very important, so-called slave ship is a very important artifact. And we have to understand the role that it plays in our memory. Marcus Rediker wrote an excellent book called The Slave Ship of Human History. And I think it's instructive if we read just one passage from that. Please indulge me for a second. He talked about the importance of the slave ship. He said the ship was thus essential to a profound, interrelated set of economic changes, essential to the rise of capitalism, the seizure of new lands, the expropriation of millions of people and their redeployment in growing market-oriented sectors of the economy, the mining of gold and silver, the cultivating of tobacco and sugar, the concomitant rise of long-distance commerce, and finally a planned accumulation of wealth and capital beyond anything the world had ever witnessed. Slowly, fitfully, unevenly, but with undoubted power, a world market and an international capitalist system emerged. Each phase of the process, from exploration to settlement to production to trade and the construction of new economic order, required massive fleets of ships and their capacity to transport both expropriated laborers and the new commodities. And he says the Guineaman, which is a type of ship, was the linchpin, the most valuable piece of the whole system. Without it, we will see a new reality now. So the slave ship is a very important thing here. So the Clotilda, that I'll talk about a little bit later, is a critically invaluable piece, not just because it was last, but for other reasons as well that I elaborate on. So this shows the route, primary route that was involved in the transatlantic era of African enslavement and the transoceanic era. You can see there was in the Indian Ocean as well. So how did this process all get started? How did this exploration and exploitation and oppression of other individuals that was different, quote, different from others get started? This is from a 14, right, it sort of dramatizes a 15th century situation that happened. This is the King Alfonso of Portugal, and this is Pope Nicholas V. He essentially issued a papal bull, i.e. sort of like an executive order, if you will, giving Portugal the right to explore and capture, take other individuals' resources and bring them back for the interests of Portugal. This was the Pope that issued this papal bull. So you have the God-ordained right to exploit, take, and enslave, if you will, these people, other peoples of the world. That's how it got started. And a key individual that played an incredible role in that was Henry the Navigator. I'm sure you learned about him in school in terms of one narrative. But if you go to Portugal, you'll see a lot about him. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But Henry the Navigator started this process around 1444, 1445. He imported a number of Africans. He had sailed down the west coast of Africa and brought them back to Portugal. And in the city of Porto, they disembarked there, and that's a record that talks about that. But this is the statue of Henry the Navigator. It was on a plaza in Faro, Portugal, right here. That's the image of him. And this is the same statue, but it's been relocated. When we went to Portugal last week, we visited a museum of enslavement there. That there's a lot of resistance to establish this museum, and there was hard pushback. And the government and the municipality fought hard to not even tell this story. So what happened was they moved this statue and placed it here. If they move it, there has to be some reason strategically. Well, you see that circle right there? That's the Enslavement Museum. Placed Henry the Navigator out front prominently in the Enslavement Museum. And you can see, I mentioned the police showed up, this police car there. So in Portugal, there's a glorification of these discoveries and this adventurism and this exploitation of other human beings. This huge monolith here is called the Monument to the Discoveries, over 300, well, almost 300 feet tall. And it tells the story of about 33 Portuguese explorers that goes up the mountain, both sides of the mountain, on both sides. Up front here is Vasco da Gama, and standing out front holding a ship is the one and only Henry the Navigator. He basically designed this vessel called a caravel with the listing sails that you can tack with it. So he was a very, very good innovator in terms of marine science and technology. But the misappropriation of power plays in this as well. So they have these monuments to the discoveries, but there's not one monument that we found that talks about their role in enslavement in Portugal. And so we're having those discussions and dialogues with some people over there about how we can appropriately acknowledge that. Which led also to, after enslavement, to the colonization or colonialization of countries in Africa, in South America, in India, and even in the South Pacific. And it led to colonizing these people and disrupting stuff in their lives. Do you know who that is? He was a human being that breathed He felt pain. He had a family. He had a mother. He had a father. But did they care? No, they was incentivized to use these people to make profits. And this shows the footprint of Portugal. That's a graphic from World History Encyclopedia. And just to compare, this is a graphic that was in the museum over there. It says Portugal is not a tiny country. They must have had this a short person complex or something. But this is Portugal here, and these are the lands that they colonized. Angola alone covers most of Eastern Europe. This is Mozambique and Portugal and all the smaller islands, South Tome, Cape Verde, Príncipe, Gao, and others that they colonized. So let's get to the essence of really why I'm here. I know that was quite a long sort of intro. So ships and voyages of the transatlantic area of African enslavement. There was some 12,000 ships that was involved in the trade, some 12,000 ships that was involved in the trade. They made some 40,000 voyages across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Involved, of those number of ships, we know in the historical record, there was about 1,000 or so wrecking events. But if you look at the archaeological record, we only have documented about 10 or 15 of those vessels out of 12,000 ships. Why is that the case? I'll let you try to find an answer to that question. So it involved the largest movement of human beings in human history. From 12 to 15 million, academics say. They like to use 12.4 million. But Peter Curtin was a historian, and he wrote a book called the Slave Trade, a Census, rather. And he's mentioned somewhere in there about 25 million. Other scholars have jacked it up with some evidence. So the way you account for that, the actual number is very, very difficult. There was ledgers and so forth that these ships have. This was investment, so there was very detailed levels of accountability of these voyages. But it was ran like a mafia. So some of these boat captains would say, "Oh, I collected 200 from Weta," when he actually collected 300, and the difference he did something else with. So again, this is very, very serious for us to understand what actually happened. So the largest forced migration, if you want to call it that, in human history. This graphic shows the movement from the Slate website, shows the movement of those during the 17th century. And this one is very, very telling. So it talks about the embarkation and disembarkation of the main players in the transatlantic era of enslavement, where they embarked from and where they disembarked from, Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, so forth. But during the latter part of the 18th century, Portugal dominated. They dominated. They moved almost 4 million people. In total, almost 6 million people out of the, if you want to use the number 12, that's almost 50% of the massive number of Africans that was taken out of the country. This is from that data was taken from the slavevoyages.org database. You can go and see that. So very quickly, let's just get through this and talk a little bit about restoring memory, making connections beyond the silence and the shame. I'm going to talk real quickly about three or four of these vessels, and then drill in on the South Jose and the Clotilda. The Mirror was a Dutch East Indian vessel. It has 3 masts, and it sailed in 1776 with about 100 captured Africans on it. It came from Madagascar, and it had a leader on there named Masavana. Once they got aboard, they revolted and took over the ship. I just show a graph to show where the Dutch East Indian, that was trading all over the world, probably the world's first global conglomerate. But this is Masavana. He led a revolt on the vessel. They took over the vessel. The crew had retreated to the back of the stern and the back of the ship deck in the captain's quarters. And so they locked themselves in back there. And so Masavana and the captains had a problem. They didn't know how to sail the ship. So they began negotiating with the crew that was remaining. They did kill some of them. And so the crew said, "Okay, Masavana, you want to go back to Madagascar, we'll take you back." And so Masavana said, "Okay," didn't have much choice. They set sail, and ended up off the coast of South Africa. Once they ended up off the coast of South Africa, Masavana went up on deck and said, "This doesn't smell like Madagascar air. And those are not Madagascar birds. We're going to kill you all. He said, no, 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 no. Why don't you send an entourage ashore? And if it's Madagascar, they will light 3 fires. And if it's not Madagascar, we have to negotiate or whatever's going to happen. Right? So the entourage went aboard. However, the militia in South Africa at the time saw this derelict boat coming ashore, what they thought was coming ashore, and thought it was an attack. So there was a militia there. And so when the crew went ashore, some of them was executed. They asked him why he was coming ashore, and they didn't answer. So Masavana witnessed this, real quick story. He witnessed this, and he said, this is not Madagascar. We're going to kill you all. He said, no, no. Out of desperation, the captain wrote a note, put it in a bottle, and threw it out the window. The bottle eventually washed ashore. One of the militiamen picked up the bottle and read it, and it talked about lighting 3 fires. So they lit 3 fires. And right before Masavana was about to execute the crew, he saw the 3 fires, and he thought it was his people lighting them. He said, this is Madagascar. Let's go. It's an abandoned ship. The abandoned ship, the ship went adrift and crashed somewhere north along the coastline in South Africa. But once Masavana and his entourage went ashore, of course, some of those were executed. Masavana was captured, and he was in prison and put on trial, actually. There's a document to show where he witnessed the trial with an X, a very important document. But he was put on trial here. This is Cape Town, South Africa. This is called the Lion's Head. And that is what? Robben Island. It's where Mandela was in prison. Yeah. It's where Mandela was in prison. And so we believe the grave of Masavana is on Robben Island. So keep in mind here the Lion's Head. It's going to play prominent in the South Survey story. So that's Robben Island. We're looking at Cape Town and Table Mountain there. The Zan, another incredible story. And just real quickly, the Zan, because of an incompetent captain who was trying to get to Jamaica, he navigated wrong, made some navigational errors, way out into the Gulf of Mexico, about 3 or 4 days out. He recognized his error, but once he recognized it, he said, well, we don't have enough supplies for the crew and our captives to make it back to Jamaica. So he came up with this scheme. Well, if I throw them overboard, I can collect the insurance. So shackled in chains, he began to throw men, women, and children overboard. It's in the historical record. On 29th, took 4 chained. 2 days later, 42 more, and 26 more before reaching Black River, Jamaica. The Lewiston is one of probably the most incredible stories out of this whole volume of information. It was a Dutch vessel trying to get to Suriname with over 700 individuals on it. It was a massive vessel of the day. They improved the technology of these vessels. If you know anything about Panamax vessels that goes through the Panama Canal, they ride the canal. This is one of the Panamax vessel of the day. So about 700 individuals on this vessel. So on January 1st, 1738, it ran aground at the mouth of the Moroni River. While it wanted to go up the Suriname River, but he misnavigated. And while he was coming back out of the river, right at the delta there, the mouth of the river, a storm came up. The storm, he knew he wanted to wait out the storm, so he dropped anchor. Anchor took hold and swung the stern around and slammed it into the reef. They started taking on water quickly. 700 people in the hold. The captain recognized he was going to lose his vessel, so he gave instructions to the crew to abandon the ship. However, before he told them to abandon the ship, he told them to lock the hatches down. So over a 2 or 3 day period, as the ship broke up, 700 Africans in chains, even if they were prolific swimmers, fell into the ocean. So these are just 3 of many. Each one of those 12,000 vessels that I mentioned have very unique stories of their own. The last that I mentioned before we talk about the primary ones is the Guerrero. And this is the one that got DWP started. We've been searching for this vessel ever since our existence, actually. And we just had some young people do another search for us this past summer, actually. But it's an incredible story. I won't go into a lot of detail. It was a pirated vessel. Can you imagine the horror of being put on a vessel of enslavement into that hole, setting sail, and once you get out to sea, you get hijacked by pirates. They got hijacked by pirates named Gomez and Onda Guerrero, and so he set sail, was trying to get to Cuba. If you a little bit about history in 1807, 1808, the U.S. and Britain abolished the importation, didn't abolish slavery, just the importation of individuals into the U.S. And that's very important. And it wasn't done out of some humanitarian concern. It led directly to the War of 1812, but that's another story. So they had put in place this, what they call this Africa Fleet to interdict or intervene vessels that was crossing the Atlantic. And so a British vessel called the Nimble saw the Guerrero, began to give chase. Guerrero started running, put up full sails, but it was getting dark. He slammed right into what we think was Crayford's Reef off the coast of Key Largo, Florida. And so that's what we've been searching. Several people have been searching there. The NOAA has done some incredible work, and National Park Service has done some incredible work. We collaborated with both organizations to do this search. 41 Africans went down in the wrecking event. But what happened later, nighttime fell and some salvors came out from Key Largo rather, to assist and try to help them out. The pirates, the night fell, these three vessels, they stole the salvage vessels and 300 of the Africans that was on the Guerrero, and eventually sailed them to Cuba. They got hijacked again. About 120 souls left, and they took them down to Key West. Long story, they languished down there for 3 years, and eventually about 91 of them end up in Liberia. Of course, you know the history of Liberia. It's an American colony, colonized by the U.S., so forth and so on. And there's descendant communities in Liberia today that came off to Guerrero that we're trying to establish relationships. So with those vessels, founded the church you're all familiar with. This is Kojo's statue out front, and a memorial for him in the Africatown Cemetery there. This is where Clotilda lies, in the murky waters of the Mobile River. You can see the water is very, very murky. It's very difficult to dive in that water. Zero visibility. And we was there May of last year extracting some artifacts. We extracted some 90 artifacts, 94 exactly, from the vessel, cataloged them, and put 90 of those back. The other 4 was of such importance that we, Jim get a message. I recommend that you install these updates. We're going to cancel that. So some of these artifacts were so valuable, we decided that Jim Delgado, the principal investigator, decided that these need to be conserved and help tell the narrative around the Clotilda. This is a hawse pipe where the anchor chain sort of runs through. But this one is really incredible. You see it's a circular piece, and it's what's called a composite artifact made of different material. And these are the curators, conservators rather, that has it down in Charleston at that place, trying to conserve it. So actually we can go into the Africatown Heritage House and help tell the story. What is it? It's actually, we think it's a pulley mechanism that was used to on the rudder system. What's even more amazing here is you look closely, that thing sticking out here, it's rope. You can actually see some of it here. That's still there. An incredible diagnostic material to tell us more about this. The way it was braided and the type of material that was used. So once this thing is conserved, it's going to be very revealing. So I talked about the spiritual essence in artifacts and material culture. I think they can tell us a lot about, again, much more. It would enhance the scientific process if we understand what that spiritual essence is all about, when we give voices to the silence.
I won't go a lot into this, it gets a little deep, but it talks about being, the nature of being before you're born, and the nature of being while you're born, and your nature of being after you're born, that transcendence I was talking about. And what it talks about is that we are beings. And more than just human beings, we are beings before, we are beings during, we are beings after. And you wrote a good book on that called From the Life Psychology to the Science of Being. But voices in those artifacts speaks to us if we know how to listen. But you have to know how to listen. And don't approach these artifacts with an all-knowing sort of attitude that I have the science, I can extract information. Yes, you can, but there's another whole dimension. You can extract even deeper information. There's an archaeologist in Australia named Ian McLeod, did a lot of critical work using metals. He said, in the few programs that specialize in the conservation of archaeological sites and objects, there appears to be scant attention given to the issue of the spiritual dimensions in assessment of condition reports. When dealing with shipwreck sites on which people have perished, these sacred sites, an awareness of the spiritual element is vital if it is the best outcomes for the sites are to be obtained. You've seen some of these images of the Clotilda. These are sonar images that was taken early on, and this is the one that after the May mission, we cleaned up the site, removed some of the trees, and deposited them further out in the river. If you understand the orientation, your upriver is this way. This is the bow of the vessel. This is the stern of the vessel. And most of the stern is under sediment, river sediment, so it's buried here. But what makes this so incredible? How many ships was involved in the trade? Over 12,000. This is the only artifact, the only ship where you can actually see the bow, where you actually have a hull. What makes it even more incredible, not only can you see the hull, once you look up real close, this is the forecast of the front part of the ship. Right here is what's called a bulkhead, like a wall in the ship. Right when you're on the bulkhead, in this space right here, is the cargo hold for the 110 to do the harbor crossing of the Atlantic. That's the space that I go in. You can imagine what it's like to dive into that space, and I'll give you a sense in a moment. So that space is 26 feet by, definitely smaller than this room. Now, we are about 30 people, but 110, maybe half the size of this room, 110 people, lying down flat on wood and during the turbulence of the sea. So this is what it looks like underwater. So it's again, the water is very murky. It's a very treacherous site. There's things you can get impaled on. There's water moskins there, as you know. It's part of the work. They were alligators too, so we did see some water moskins while I was there. Yeah. And so hopefully we ran them off once we got in the water, but we never counted when we were in the water. But you can see the visibility is virtually zero. So while we were diving there, we basically had to dive by braille, just feeling our way. So I went down on the bow of the vessel. We had to tie up a buoy on the bow, and just followed it down, and just feeling my way until I got to that bulkhead. And I knew on the other side of that bulkhead was where the 110 suffered. So I went a little further, I grabbed the gun wall, the top of the hull, I built a few kicks, and went over into that cargo hold. As I said, at the top I had about 1,500 dives. I know a little bit about peak buoyancy, being stable in the water. But once I went into that space, I began to tumble and roll. I peeked all the way around. And it was amazing, trying to reestablish my balance. And that was my sense that was them putting me in that horrible space, trying to give me a sense of what they endured. About 10 or 15 seconds, I did stabilize myself and began to probe the cargo space. The floor is gone. This wood material is gone, but the post at the floor that was supporting the floor is still there. Those posts are there. Of course, the hull on that side is still there. It was on the starboard side. It's still there. And there's a half deck. A half deck is, you have the main floor. A half deck sticks out, just, well, not halfway, but out from the side of the hull. And they also laid people up there on this half deck to increase capacity. some of that material is still there. I began to go back to the back of the cargo hold and probe in the sediment. I did feel a few things. I found an iron rod. It was something, I don't know whether it was put there later on, because the Clotilda, the location of the Clotilda has been known for a long time. So I put that back and began to probe more in this sediment. After about 40, 45 minutes or so, I thought it was time to come up. I signaled my buddy we need to go up. And you see, best way I can describe it is, you know what a flipper dolphin is? When they jump out of the water, they just flip and land in the water, pure joy, right? And so when I came out and broke the surface, what thought that came to mind, and what was it like for them when they came out of that hole and emerged into the fresh air and saw actual sunlight? You know, there was some sense that the joy came to mind, but that joy was just short-lived, you know, to be out of that space and then begin a life of enslavement. So I had to kind of humble myself. I knew I had the experience from the South José, engaged in that vessel, and I knew I was going to be diving on the Clotilda. So a very dear friend of mine named Sabrina Johnson and I said, Kamau, if you're going to go into that space, you need to acknowledge those ancestors that endured that space. You need to compose, and she collaborated, we composed an ancestral prayer. I'll just share that with you real quickly. And before I went into the water, this means we're about to go into the water. We had a big barge up there and began this dive. I stopped, paused, and recited this prayer. An ancestral prayer, first dive on the Clotilda, reviving the spirits who travel on the Clotilda. Beloved ancestors, your voices have been quiet for 162 years, but your silence ends now. Your voices and memory are lifted now from this wretched vessel through us, and we welcome you to speak through us. Our connection will never be broken. We are because of you. Thank you for reaching out to us. Blessings to the Spirit always. And I made the dive and acknowledge their presence. And we still can acknowledge their presence. We still can acknowledge their humanity. We still can acknowledge their dignity and their grace by calling out their names. So call out their names. Oluwale Kazulu. You can call out their names if you like. Rashola Sally Adams. That's how we remember calling out their names. Clotilda McCrae. Kupoli, Poli Allen. Sasa Kilby, Osasa Kilby. Kibi, Abachi, Claire Turner. Charlie Lewis. Gompa, Peter Lee. We call out their names to remember, and we will remember. Ashe. So you know that the Africa House opened up back in July. That was an incredible undertaking, and so some of the artifacts have been conserved now. We'll be in the Africa House, and but we're here to train young people how to dive, how to do scuba dive, and we've trained a few of them already. And what I like to do is identify the team that's here that's going to help me out. I want Mr. Cortland Butts to stand up. This is Cortland Butts. Cortland is the dive safety officer for the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. So he has the awesome responsibility to over 100 dives to get in the water and everyone comes back safely. So thank you, Cortland.
Yes.
That's Clotilda there on the first team. Also with me, I have Miss Jimmy Mack, rather. Where you at, Jimmy? She stepped out. Oh, there's Jimmy. Thank you. Honor Jimmy, please. Jimmy has certified the very first diver in our Swim to Scuba program, Miss Naima Deutsch. She's a 16-year-old young lady, and she's taken off. She's going to be diving in the Georgia Aquarium this weekend, and tomorrow we might have an interview with her on Fox 10, so kind of look out for that. Also with me, I have, we call them newbies, but they've been diving for quite a while. Miss Melody Garrett, I mentioned her earlier. Melody and I have been dive buddies for a very long time. We got some incredible stories to tell, but Melody is the dive safety officer for the very first club of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. It's called the Underwater Adventure Seekers. Melody is responsible for the safety of that club. And we also have with us Mr. Willie Ross. This is Willie's first time in Mobile, Africa town, so he's very excited. So we're going to be at the Kids Park Pool on Saturday from 10 a.m. to about 3 p.m. We do a program called Discover Scuba, introducing these young folks to scuba diving. And if it sticks, you know, these are some of the instructors that will take them on later on and certify them. Portland has certified the president, actually, of the Clotilda Descendants Association, Mr. Jeremy Ellis. He certified him. Jeremy is diving. He's going to dive with Naima this weekend at the aquarium. So we're trying to certify them and keep them diving, not just for the sake of diving. You open up incredible opportunities once you learn how to dive. Not just in marine science, but it builds confidence, a whole bunch of other things. And so we can see that in these young people once we get them in the water. So we're happy about that program. We're collaborating with, the program is sponsored by the Shipwrecks project out of the Smithsonian. We're collaborating with the African Heritage Preservation Foundation and also the Dearborn YMCA Marlin swim team. They are working on the swim side and we're working on the scuba side to bring these young folks, give these young folks some other opportunities. This is some images from the first time that we were here. This young man was extremely excited. We had to kind of control him. Once he got that gear on, he wanted to go down to the deep water and boil around. So he was extremely excited. So we hope to see that excitement tomorrow. We're expecting a huge, about 30 plus young people tomorrow. So our work has been documented, of course, in Nat Geo films and so forth. This is one called Clotilda, the Last Slave Ship. Of course, you know a lot about the Descendant movie, exhibitions that's been in museums and so forth. But our work continues. The DWP search is continuing. We're searching for the Guerrero. As I mentioned, young folks did a mission here over the summer. There's another vessel called the Wanderer. It's the penultimate vessel, the next to the last vessel that brought enslaved people into the U.S. illegally under the same pretense as the Clotilda. So that's a similar story. The Aurora is a French vessel off the coast of Mozambique Island. That's an incredible story that's going to be coming. The Lewiston, I talked about that one. And also the ships of the Black Star Line. Black Star Line was the first African-American owned steamship line. It was owned by Marcus Garvey. And his idea was to take people who want to go back to the continent of Africa. And he had about 4 or 5 ships that he tried to make seaworthy. Some of them were, but we know where 2 of them are. And so we got permission. This sign is still living. He's a Dr. Julius Garvey, still living in New York. And he's given us permission to conduct that search. So please keep these people in memory. They were human beings with grace, with dignity. So keep them in memory. We will always remember them. They will never be forgotten. Never again. There's a philosophy in the Southern Africa region, but mostly identified with South Africa. And it was very prevalent in Portugal when we were there. Matter of fact, Nelson Mandela's grandson was with us in this, but he was a very profound speaker. But we talked about this notion of Ubuntu. You know what that is? Simply said, I am because you are. Because you are, I am. Thank you all for coming out.
Instead of 60, it was 1859. So this was 1959, and they were commemorating 100 years. Now, what I've never understood is why only those 2 families were at the event. They were Dennisons and Cudjoliuses.
We influence this law. So explicitly July 7, 1860.
But those people thought it was 1859, so they thought they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of that monument. It sure was, and they put it in front of the church. Now it's just that head, because that one was taken and they found it over on the causeway or somewhere, because I was away when all that happened. I came back in 2004. My mother had a stroke, and I came home to take care of her, but I had stayed with her for 30 years. Yeah, but it's nice meeting you.